Chapter 4. Opportunities. As I reached the last semester of the computer science program at Dawson College, a unique opportunity to network and create a foundation for my future abroad presented itself. My final grade, and subsequently my graduation, would be determined by my performance interning for a company of my choice. Usually, students pursued internships at companies in Montreal or elsewhere in Canada, but I had my sights set on something greater. I didn't really know where I wanted to go, but I felt like New York City was calling to me, and I just had this feeling that I needed to go there next. I was learning to trust my intuition, and I had already begun building relationships with people and businesses in New York and elsewhere outside of my native city. I wasn't necessarily anticipating living in a different city, but all of the pieces fell into place, and it felt like the right time to leave. In fact, getting an internship in New York was the easy part. It was not long before I was offered a place at Chabad.org, the largest Jewish organization in the world, which is headquartered in the heart of Brooklyn. Actually, it was much harder to convince Dawson College to let me go. My eagerness to intern for a company in another country came as a shock to the computer science department at Dawson College. It is possible that I was the first person in the program to attempt it. In any case, the department heads were definitely not fans of the idea. They were probably focused on using the program as a way to prepare and train students for careers in Canada, but I was determined not to be limited by location or other people's expectations of my own career and life. I had already seen what it was like to attempt to fit into someone else's box, and I had learned my lesson. Doing things my own way was the only course of action that had worked for me in the past. Plus, I had already been accepted by Chabad.org to build their mobile apps, and it was the dream job I had longed for ever since I declared at the age of 10 that I was going to become a software engineer. So I fought for permission from the department to pursue my internship in the United States. Ultimately, I succeeded, and soon found myself in Brooklyn, New York, immersed in software building. In short, sometimes you have to do the unexpected, even if it is a surprise to you too, in order to build a bridge to your future. Apart from wanting to be a software engineer, I didn't have any other plans in mind for after graduation, although I had already started to make some friends in the Big Apple. By the time I entered my last year at Dawson, I had no idea that I would be living there by the time I graduated. However, I was always on the lookout for new opportunities, and I worked hard to make sure that I never closed any doors once they were open. For example, while still in my early years at Dawson College, I cultivated strong friendships with locals of the new city, and they were still waiting for me when I arrived. Although I didn't know for sure that I was ever going to end up in the same city as those friends, having made those connections turned out to be a lifesaver later on. While I did have to plan a few steps ahead in order to get my internship, I really didn't know where I was going or what path I was following. As it turns out, that is another ingredient to success. No matter what other people tell you, you can't spend your life planning for the future because it is always going to change, and sometimes not in your favor. I'm not saying you should go off carpe dieming without a care in the world either. Instead, you should keep your goals small, tangible, and short-term. When constructing a castle from the ground up, it doesn't make sense to agonize over the final outcome. From the first brick laid to the final turret, there's too many things to do, and too many variables involved. Instead, it makes more sense to work on the wall in front of you and worry about how to perfectly balance that brick you currently have in your hand. If you've really focused on your foundation, you can, every once in a while, take a step back to see the complete picture, and you may be surprised by the fortress your castle has become. My internship at Chabad.org was one such brick that I laid down, without having really any idea of what I was building. Surely it was the dream job I had wanted since I was 10 years old. If I wanted to, I could turn this internship into a career and continue building and creating apps for this organization or any other. But to my surprise, despite actualizing my childhood dream, I felt empty. I wasn't enjoying the work as much as I had expected to. It wasn't that the job was a bad one. Actually, it was great. The company was big. There was room to grow. My colleagues and bosses were incredible people. There was nothing wrong with the job. Yet still, I felt like I was missing something. In those 4 years at Dawson College, I had become an addict. And no, it wasn't to Ritalin. Actually, it wasn't any drug at all that had me in its grip. I had become addicted to the stressful and painstaking process of transformation. I loved how it felt to ace a math exam on concepts I didn't even know existed only a few months before. I had learned to thrive working under tight time frames, and I reveled in the thought of accomplishing what others believed I couldn't do. Consequently, when I made it to Chabad.org, where the deadlines were reasonable, the work predictable, and the objectives were within easy reach, I simply couldn't get comfortable. Once my internship finished, I decided it would be time to move on and work towards something greater. Even so, I am grateful for my time at Chabad.org, as it opened the final door I needed in order to graduate from Dawson College. Chabad.org also showed me that while I loved computer science, I couldn't see it as my long-term career. In addition, the time I spent away from school during my internship led me to realize that I was still hungry for a bigger challenge, and that I wasn't ready yet to enter the workforce. So, I did the one thing I feared most. I went back to college to pursue a degree in mathematics, the field that had been my torment that first year at Dawson, and the one subject that most reminded me of my weaknesses. At this point, I was 24 years old, and I could feel the pressure to make money and enter the workforce. I had what felt like all of the skills in place to earn a good salary, and to finally sit back and enjoy life more. In many ways, it did not seem like the right time to go back to school. Yet, returning to school also felt like an opportunity that I wouldn't necessarily get to experience at any other point in my life. There was also so much left of New York that I hadn't seen or explored, and I knew the last thing I wanted was to return to Montreal. So, while I could have followed the money and applied to another job, I followed opportunity instead, and I would recommend that path to anyone, especially those in business. Studying or any learning opportunity really is a luxury, no matter whether the subject matter directly relates to a career or not. There are so many students in college who don't know what they want to do, who are so often pressured by family, friends, and society to make a decision. What they really need to hear is, and if this applies to you, listen closely, it is all right to not know the outcome of a degree. It is important to make the most of any course, regardless of whether that will lead to a future profession. For example, a student can still learn a lot from studying psychology, even if they don't ultimately become a psychologist. Understanding human psychology will almost certainly translate to the workforce, simply because that psychology student will acquire a better understanding of how to navigate their relationships with others, even if the job they ultimately get is in finance. The Dawson College Computer Science program had prepared me for the world in so many incredible ways, but that didn't mean that I had to become a computer engineer. Having completed my internship at Chabad.org, I could now see how easy it would be to remain in the workforce. But even though I had a chance to make more money, I also had the unique opportunity to continue learning and to truly master mathematics, once and for all. I had come to a fork in the road, and it was now or never. Yeshiva University is located on the Upper West Side of New York City, and that was where I decided I needed to go. My parents were at a complete loss. From a financial perspective, enrolling in YU made little sense. The difference in the cost of tuition for attending a Canadian university, especially for residents, compared to a U.S. school was astronomical. Moreover, apart from the cost of tuition, I would have to pay for housing, food, and other expenses, all of which were above my means in New York City to begin with. In short, my family thought I was living a fantasy if I thought I could attend a university there. With no support from my family, who urged me to apply to universities in Montreal, I took matters into my own hands. After multiple attempts of trying to arrange a meeting with an YU advisor, only to find that they were all completely booked up, I set out one morning and caught the train up to 185th Street, determined to speak in person with an advisor to find out how I could apply. I showed up outside the door of one advisor's office. He was clearly busy and not very happy to see someone without an appointment, but I insisted. At first, he dismissed me entirely and told me not to even bother applying, as I hadn't even taken the SATs. Shortly after, he asked me to leave as he had another meeting to attend. I left his office, but I did not leave the building. I wasn't going to give up so easily. While he had his meeting, I waited in the hallway until it was over, and then entered again. Although he was a little annoyed, he finally agreed to hear me out. What the advisor told me that day changed my life. He made it clear that if I was going to get into YU, I had to apply immediately. I also would have to take the SATs as soon as possible and receive high scores, especially in mathematics. The doubt at my ability to accomplish any of these tasks was etched plainly on the advisor's face. But he did tell me one thing as I left his office that day. "I don't know what you'll do with your degree exactly," he said, "but I promise you one thing. You will graduate as a scientist or an engineer." Those words sent an electric charge through me. The future was within reach. I could do this. As soon as my meeting with the YU advisor was over, I rushed to the nearest computer and registered to take the SATs in a local high school at the earliest possible date. Most people spend their entire high school experience preparing for this college entrance exam. I had 2 weeks. It was exhilarating. I was back in the trenches studying as hard as I could in very little time, and I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. When the results came back, I found that I had performed exceptionally well, especially in mathematics. Once I knew I had met the SAT requirements, I applied to YU right away. The enrollment officer who I had spoken with earlier took my case and he asked me to meet him again, awarding me with a scholarship to attend the university. I couldn't believe it. Life had given me a way forward and I was going to make the most out of this opportunity. My parents still didn't fully approve, but it didn't matter because I had decided to go through with my plan using nothing but my own means. Even with a scholarship, it wasn't easy. I was barely able to afford rent to start with. For the first few years, I actually lived in a friend's walk-in closet, even sleeping diagonally across the floor because my body didn't fit lengthwise across the room. Thankfully, Pythagoras' theorem had my back. The last 3 semesters, I lived on a friend's couch. I didn't feel like I needed a big place to come home to anyways. Just like at Dawson, most of my days and nights were spent at the library, and I regularly fell asleep in the study lounge. This happened so often that it became a game for the other students to find library boy sleeping around campus. I didn't have much of a budget for food either, and so I practically lived on cans of chickpeas and a few other basic foods. It doesn't sound great, I know, but those were some of the best years of my life. My future was in my hands, and over time, even though I refused to do things their way, I want my parents' respect in the end. Yeshiva University was without a doubt much harder than Dawson College. My new mathematics courses were much more intense than those I had taken for computer science, and my classmates were extremely intelligent, well-educated honors students, but I enjoyed the pressure. By this phase of my life, I was already experienced in academia, myself, and I had my own tools. I took this time to perfect my skills and unconventional methods. Having mastered the art of self-learning, I no longer needed teachers. All I needed was the course syllabus and a colleague's notes. As the courses became harder, I got better. Ultimately, I graduated with a degree in mathematics and strong grades from all of my years at YU. More importantly, I fell deeply in love with math. I had come so far from the boy who was ridiculed for raising his hand in class so many years ago.